it's an interesting time. And one of the things I'd like to start our conversation with, Jim, is how you started SAS. You were a PhD, working on your PhD, or had it. Were you an accidental entrepreneur like Gordon Moore calls himself, or did you have the idea of starting a company long before you came upon the idea of SAS?
Well, not about starting a company, but about the fact that we really enjoyed being programmers, and we loved developing software that other people were going to use. And I also enjoyed the fact that it was paying my way through college. So that's how SAS got started back in the 66, 67 time period that we made our, and this was, I was working on my master's and PhD degrees at NC State. And a fellow named Jim Barr came up with some of the basic design for the underlying structure, and I developed a lot of the applications that sat on top of it. But we announced and had developed and provided documentation for our very first SAS system in 1968.
68, but you started as a company in 76.
76, yeah. That's we were being funded. I think a lot of the university data centers and all the computation that were going on at university was being funded by NIH at the time. And then when Nixon came in, he said he wanted to quit that and only fund NIH to fund the university that had a medical program associated with them. So we were sort of on our own, and so for the next 4 years, we were on what's called soft money. That is, you're welcome to stay at the university provided you can pay your own salary. And so we actually did that.
So your entrepreneurial efforts then were writing grants.
Well, the first group of our users were actually the Southern Experiment Stations that had adopted SAS all over the South to analyze all the agricultural data. So we went to them when we had this funding situation and asked them each to chip in some money, and they said, well, we'll support you for a few years, but you've got to start selling SAS to other organizations so that you can make your own way. So after about 4 years, we had a user group meeting that one of our users had called down in Florida, and we had 350 people there. And we came back from that with, I guess, pretty lofty ideas about, boy, we ought to get out of the university and get out on our own, since we're already paying our salaries anyway, let's just move across the street. So we were able to come up with a deal with the university to let us move across and carry the intellectual property with us.
What do you make of all the changes going on in hardware infrastructure today? What do you make of cloud computing?
Well, we had time sharing back in 64, 65. And I mean, other than the fact they've got a virtualized operating system, what the hell is different? It's the same thing. You're going to use somebody else's hardware, and you're going to upload whatever operating system and solution you want to up to it. It's time sharing. I'm sorry. It's a big server farm with a virtual operating system. That's all it is.
Yeah.
I heard so many people, oh, God, I can't wait till the cloud computing gets here. It's going to solve all of our problems. We'll be able to find all the answers we need right there. I'm thinking, I'm sorry, you got this picture wrong. You're not going to find any solution up there unless you put it up there yourself. I know y'all are counting on cloud computing. I wish you all luck. I'm not going to lose 30% overhead on virtualizing my systems, though. They're going to run straight operating system.
Well, how do you? What happens the day though that you're funny, you're confident, but so were a lot of companies. IBM was confident in the late 80s and almost went bankrupt in 1992. The mini computer industry that we mentioned was riding high. Tracy Kidder wrote a Pulitzer Prize winning book called The Soul of a New Machine on the rise of data general, and then they all just went. What they missed was what they all missed. IBM recovered from, but the mini computer industry did not, was a disruption. I mean, how do you keep an eye out on? I mean, it seems to me the potential flip side of this wonderfully benevolent culture you have is that it could become insular, and it could miss some big disruptive event in your industry, some equivalent of I don't know, a Salesforce.com coming into your industry and changing the rules. How do you look out for that stuff?
Well, we have a few tricks up our own sleeves in that area. We're doing some amazing stuff with grids right now, trying to break out some of these large risk problems and some of the retail optimization problems that are taking 12 hours or more, and we're trying to get the time down to 10 to 15 minutes. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us here in working in this area, that we have a lot of expertise in this area. So I mean, that itself might become somewhat disruptive.
And you spend what percentage of your revenue on R&D?
About 22%. So that's because I'm an R&D person myself, and I like R&D, and I've been doing some work on this grid stuff myself because it's really exciting stuff. I mean, to turn on 1,600 CPUs, cores, and make them all go at the same time, that's a lot of fun.
So you do like the cloud.
Hey, if you like virtual operating systems, fine.
You like the hardware part of the cloud. Yeah. Now, one of the things that your SAS is famous for is its corporate culture. I think that many of us read about you and read about your 4% turnover, read about your beautiful corporate campus in Cary, and it kind of reminds some of us who know the history of Silicon Valley about Hewlett-Packard in its benevolent days under Dave and Bill in the 50s and 60s. You yourself kind of cast this figure like David Packard. I want to talk about how did you settle on that idea as a philosophy, and how does an idea like that stand up during a tough economic time?
Well, I think the idea comes from the fact that we were one of the very first knowledge companies that started back in '76. When we first left, the four of us that left were all owners, so it made a lot of sense that we should let the company pay for soft drinks and Cokes and things like that. And as we began to add more employees, we just continued those kind of practices. But knowledge people, everything that we create at SAS comes out of people's minds. There's not really much manufacturing at all. I mean, right now there's almost no manufacturing because we try to electronically distribute everything. So it's all what they have in their heads. And you have to have an environment that encourages people to have to be creative. So we try to have really, private offices for everybody, none of these cubicle things, so that, if you're in there watching porno, you've got your privacy, that sort of thing. And I think it leads to more creativity to do that. Now, of course, once you put everybody in their own private offices, then you end up with a lot of blank halls. Solution, put art on it. So we have, I think, there's almost 6,000 pieces of corporate art now around the world, because we believe that the art adds to the creative juices that are flowing in people.
How many of you ever have been to the SAS campus in Cary? It's literally like a top shelf country club, and you now have a hotel on campus that is the equivalent of a Four Seasons. I mean, it's just an amazing sweep of green rolling hills and trees and 50-meter swimming pools and
we just try to do what we heard went on out here.
Well, I think you heard wrong. Well, okay, another thing on corporate culture. Some companies, I think, Google has a lot of amenities for people, but the culture out here is that people work pretty long hours. One of the things you're sort of out of step on in terms of other software cultures is that your people don't work terribly long hours. In fact, you kind of encourage them not to work more than 40 or 45 hours a week. Is that still true?
Well, the standard is 35 hours a week. It always has been.
You can hear the gasps in the crowd.
You know, I've done a lot of programming myself, and you know, on numerous occasions did stay late at night and discovered the next morning that, God, this is terrible code. You had to throw it all away anyway. So I think, you know, after about 7 hours, 8 hours of coding, your stuff is starting to turn into mush. And it's really, you're just wasting, you're wasting time that night, but then you're going to waste more time the next morning correcting it. So let's just quit after 7 or 8 hours, go rest, be with your family. I think the family, the work and the family balance, it's got to be balanced. I mean, I've read of these garage operations out here that 80-hour weeks are expected, and I just don't believe in it.
Well, can you have that and still have a meritocracy within the company?
Well, people move up in salary and position based on merit, and those that just are a total failure in their job, they usually will apply for another job in some other department very quickly. So, well, you know, if you know you're in trouble here, you want to get out of here. So we let people move around from job to job.
Now, you have a no layoff policy. I want to hear how that sort of played out, how that plays out during tougher economic times. Well, first of all, how long have you had a no layoff policy in place?
Oh, we've always had that in place.
Okay.
It doesn't mean you can't get fired.
Yeah.
I mean, you show up and do nothing for long enough, you're going to be found out. You know?
Yeah.
So, but you know, back in January of this year, that people were just, I don't know, almost distracted because they were concerned about what's the future going to be like. So I did a worldwide webcast, and I said that we would not have any layoffs at SAS this year, and that was worldwide. I did ask everybody to quit hiring. Let's don't hire any more people. We have enough on staff right now, and also no raises this year. So that was the policy that we adopted. People started cutting costs left and right, all on their own. Our costs are down 6 or 7% this year over last, and we haven't really tried to do anything except ask people to try to save money. So it's amazing when you get the people at the bottom up, you know, working on those kind of problems.
One of the most famous, the two most famous CEOs of the 1990s were probably Andy Grove and Jack Welch. And Jack Welch made it a regular practice to trim the bottom % of his workforce every year.
Well, he said that in his book. I don't know that I've ever believed that.
Why not?
Well, I think if it were clearly known that you're going to trim 10%, you'd have a lot of people that would be quite demoralized and leave. I just don't think you can run a company and trim 10% a year. Think of all the money you're spending on lost productivity, on recruiting, and just the disruption of the job. I don't believe you can possibly lay off 10% or terminate 10% a year.
So what do you do with the people who were either mistakes that you hired and made a mistake, or B, somebody who put out for 2 or 3 years, worked very hard, got entrenched, and has kind of gone to sleep?
Well, the people like that, you have to speak to them. We have usually what we call a step-up plan, where they're given, here, take this money, or you've got 90 days to improve. And at the end of 90 days, if you're not improved, you're going to be out of here. So we do that. I think probably about 1.5% to 2% of our yearly employee turnover is non-voluntary. This is something that we have chosen.
And your voluntary turnover is just extraordinarily low, particularly in your industry, the software industry. It's last time I checked, it was running at around 4%, maybe probably less in the downturn.
Well, total is 4%. We hadn't had many people leave this year.
But that's a number that held up even in the go-go late 90s, right?
Yeah. We had a few leave during the dot-com, but it was about 6 in all, and 5 of them came back right afterwards. They discovered how cold it was out there in the real world. Now, some of our older people say, you know, it is so wrong for these young kids to come in and work this is their first job. Everybody ought to be required to work somewhere else first before they can come here. Then they would really appreciate it.
Well, when you get time with a policymaker, with a representative or a senator or Secretary Duncan, what do you say?
Well, I'd like to talk to Arnie about putting more technology in the schools. We have worked at SAS on trying to develop content for grades 8 through 12 that is most suited to one-to-one computing, each child with a laptop and each teacher with a laptop. I know President Obama says, well, you know, there's been so many failures with technology, and that's because no one thought to work on the content for years and years ahead of time. No one thought about training the teachers on how to use that content in their classroom. And that's the kind of thing we've been working on for the last 12 years. And we don't charge anything. Our content is free of charge. We've got over 30,000 teachers in the U.S. now using it. So I very much believe that. And
you get to see how it works, because on your campus you have your own private school, the Carey School, correct?
Well, you can test curriculum pathways just by going to our website, and you can actually drill down onto any of the lessons yourself. Yeah, Carey Academy was built back in '95 with the idea that we wanted a school that had had fewer kids in the classroom, and every child had their own computer.